What if I told you that a small-town mechanic paid $800 for a rusty 1967 Corvette at an estate sale, and what she found hidden inside it changed not just her life, but revealed a secret that had been locked away for over 50 years? This isn't just a story about restoring a classic car or finding treasure in someone's garage. It's about a promise that was never kept, a love that was never forgotten, and one woman with nothing but determination, a wrench, and an unshakable belief that every broken thing deserves a second chance. This is the story of how a mechanic girl bought a forgotten Corvette and uncovered a truth that a family had been searching for their entire lives. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it shows up at your door asking to be remembered. But before we begin, let me ask you, have you ever found something that completely changed everything you thought you knew? Drop a comment and tell us your story. Now let's dive in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert town of Ridgway, Arizona wasn't the kind of place people dreamed about. It was the kind of place people passed through on their way to somewhere better. Dusty roads, faded storefronts, and a sun that beat down so hard it felt personal. But for 29-year-old Harper Cole, it was home. Not because she loved it, but because she understood it. Ridgway was a place for the forgotten, the overlooked, the things people didn't bother to fix anymore. And Harper, she made a living fixing exactly those things. Her garage sat on the edge of town, tucked between a closed-down diner and a lot full of trailers nobody lived in anymore. The sign above the door read, "Cole's Auto Repair," in letters that had long since lost their shine. Inside, it smelled like motor oil, rust, and something else. Possibility. That's what Harper always said when people asked her why she did this kind of work. Every engine that wouldn't start, every transmission that ground itself to death, every car that someone else had given up on, it all had possibility. She just had to find it. Harper wasn't like the other mechanics in town. She didn't have a crew, she didn't advertise, she didn't even have a website. What she had was a reputation. If you had a problem no one else could solve, you brought it to Harper Cole. She'd grown up under the hoods of cars, learning from her father before he passed when she was 17. He used to say, "A car will tell you everything if you listen close enough." And Harper listened. She listened to the hiss of a cracked radiator, the whine of a failing alternator, the whisper of worn-out brake pads. She could diagnose a problem before most people even turned the key. But life wasn't all carburetors and camshafts. Harper was quiet, guarded, the kind of person who kept her distance not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. She'd learned early that people leave. Her father left, her mother moved to California and never looked back. The few friends she had in high school scattered like dust in the wind. So Harper stayed. She stayed with the cars, with the work, with the silence that felt safer than conversation. Her only real companion was a scruffy terrier mix named Copper. He was small, scrappy, and had one ear that never stood up quite right. He found him 3 years ago limping along the highway with a torn paw and no collar. She cleaned him up, stitched him together, and he never left. Copper didn't bark much, didn't demand attention. He just sat on the bench in the garage watching her work, occasionally nudging her hand when she got too lost in her own head. He was the kind of dog that understood silence. It was a Saturday morning in late September when everything changed. Harper had been up since dawn, working on a 1985 Chevy pickup that refused to stay in gear. She was elbow-deep in grease, cursing at a stubborn bolt, when Copper's ears perked up. He hopped off the bench and trotted toward the open bay door, tail wagging slowly. Harper wiped her hands on a rag and followed him outside. A car was pulling up. Old Buick, sun-bleached paint, windows tinted so dark you couldn't see inside. It rolled to a stop in front of the garage, and an older woman stepped out. She was maybe in her 70s, gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes that looked like they'd seen more funerals than birthdays. She glanced around the lot, taking in the rusted-out frames and half-gutted sedans scattered across the dirt. "You Harper Cole?" the woman asked, her voice flat, businesslike. Harper nodded. "That's me." The woman sized her up for a moment, then pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse and handed it over. It was a flyer. Estate sale. Everything must go. Address, date, time. Harper glanced at it, then back at the woman. "My husband passed 2 months ago," the woman said. No emotion in her voice, just facts. "I'm selling everything. Tools, furniture, cars. There's a Corvette in the garage. 1967. Hasn't run in decades. My husband stopped driving it in the 70s. Said he was going to restore it. Never did. It's been sitting in the garage ever since, collecting dust and regret." Harper felt something stir in her chest. Curiosity, maybe. Or something deeper. "How much are you asking?" "Make me an offer," the woman said. "Honestly, I just want it out of my sight." The next morning, Harper drove out to the address on the flyer. The house was on the outskirts of town. A one-story ranch with peeling paint and a yard overrun with weeds. There were tables set up in the driveway, covered with tools, boxes of old records, kitchen appliances that looked like they belonged in a museum. A handful of people wandered around, picking through the remains of someone's life. Harper walked past them, heading straight for the garage. The door was open, and inside, sitting under a dusty tarp, was the Corvette. She pulled the cover back slowly, revealing the car beneath. It was rough. The paint was faded, the chrome was pitted with rust, and the tires were flat and cracked. But underneath all that damage, Harper could see it. The lines, the curves, the heart of what this car used to be. It was a Stingray, L71 427 big block, 4-speed manual. This wasn't just a car, this was a legend. She opened the door. It creaked like it hadn't moved in years, and slid into the driver's seat. The interior was torn, the dash was cracked, and the steering wheel was wrapped in duct tape. But when she put her hands on that wheel, she felt something. A connection. A pulse. Like the car was still alive, just waiting for someone to wake it up. Beautiful, isn't she? Harper turned. The older woman was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her. "She was my husband's pride and joy," the woman continued. "He bought it brand new in 1967, drove it every day for years. Then one day, he just stopped, parked it in here, and never touched it again." Harper ran her hand along the dashboard. Why? The woman's expression flickered, something like sadness or maybe guilt. "I don't know. He never said. Just told me it wasn't the right time anymore." Harper sat there for a long moment, feeling the weight of the silence in that garage. Then she made her decision. "I'll give you $800 for it." The woman blinked. "That's all?" "That's what I've got," Harper said honestly. "But I'll restore it. I'll make it run again. I'll give it the life it deserves." The woman studied her, then nodded slowly. Sold. 2 days later, Harper had the Corvette towed back to her garage. Copper sniffed around it cautiously, like he wasn't sure if it was a car or a sleeping animal. Harper patted the hood and smiled for the first time in weeks. "All right, girl, let's see what you're hiding." She didn't know it yet, but inside that car, tucked away in places no one had looked in 50 years, was a story, a secret, and a truth that would turn everything upside down. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Harper spent the first 3 days just cleaning. Not fixing, not diagnosing, just cleaning. Years of dust, grime, and neglect had turned the Corvette into something that barely resembled a car anymore. She started with the exterior, washing away decades of dirt with a hose and a soft brush, careful not to damage what little paint remained. Copper watched from his usual spot on the workbench, head tilted, as if questioning why she was being so gentle with a hunk of metal. "You wouldn't understand," Harper muttered, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn patch of rust on the rear quarter panel. "This isn't just metal, it's history." And it was. As the grime came off, she could see traces of what the car used to be. The original Nassau blue paint peeked through in spots, faded but still vibrant in the right light. The chrome bumpers, though pitted and corroded, still held their shape. This car had been someone's dream once. Someone had driven it with pride, with purpose. And then, for reasons Harper didn't understand yet, they'd walked away. By the fourth day, she moved inside. The interior was worse than she had expected. The seats were torn, foam spilling out like guts from a wound. The carpet was moldy, disintegrating under her fingers. The dashboard was cracked down the middle, and the gauges were frozen in place, their needles stuck at 0, like they'd died mid-sentence. But Harper didn't mind. She'd seen worse. She'd brought worse back to life. She pulled the seats out first, hauling them one by one into the corner of the garage. Underneath the driver's seat, she found the usual debris. Old receipts, a crushed soda can, a ballpoint pen with no ink. But tucked against the seat rail, wedged so tightly it had become part of the frame, was something else. A little wallet, leather, cracked and stiff with age. Harper pulled it free and turned it over in her hands. It was old style, the kind men used to carry in their back pockets before everything went digital. She opened it carefully, half expecting it to fall apart. Inside was a driver's license, the photo faded but still visible. A man in his early 30s, dark hair, strong jawline, eyes that looked straight at the camera with quiet confidence. The name read Vincent Callahan, issued 1969, address in Ridgway, Arizona. Harper stared at the photo for a long moment. So this was him, the man who'd owned the car, the man who'd stopped driving it. She wondered what he'd looked like older, if those eyes had stayed confident, or if life had dimmed them the way it dims everything. She set the wallet aside and kept digging. Under the passenger seat, she found a pack of cigarettes, Marlboro Reds, unopened, the packaging brittle and yellowed. Behind the seat, stuffed into a gap in the upholstery, was a folded road map of California, routes highlighted in faded ink. And in the glove box, buried beneath old registration papers and a tire pressure gauge, she found something that made her breath catch. A photograph. It was black and white, edges curled, surface scratched from years of being jostled around. But the image was clear. A young woman, maybe 20, standing beside the Corvette. Her hair was long, dark, pulled back in a ponytail. She wore a sundress and sandals, one hand resting on the hood of the car, the other shading her eyes from the sun. She was smiling. Not a posed smile, but a real one, the kind that reaches your eyes and stays there. On the back, written in careful cursive, were 3 words: Elena, June 1970. Harper turned the photo over again, studying the woman's face. There was something about her, something in that smile, in the way she stood so comfortably beside the car, that made Harper feel like she was looking at a moment that mattered, a moment frozen in time, waiting for someone to remember it. She set the photo on her workbench, propped up against a toolbox where she could see it. Copper sniffed at it briefly, then settled back down with a sigh. Harper stood there for a while, hands on her hips, staring at the image. "Who were you, Elena?" she whispered. The next step was the engine. Harper popped the hood and immediately understood why the car hadn't run in decades. The 427 big block was still there, but it was a disaster. Hoses were cracked and brittle, the alternator was corroded beyond repair, and the carburetor looked like it had been gnawed on by something with teeth. But the block itself, the heart of the engine, was solid. Harper ran her hand over it, feeling the cold metal beneath her palm. "You've still got life in you," she said softly. "We just have to find it." She spent the next week methodically tearing the engine down. Every bolt, every gasket, every component was removed, inspected, and cataloged. Some parts could be saved. Others needed replacing. Harper made lists, checked suppliers, calculated costs. It was going to take time, but time was something she had. It was during one of those long nights, Harper working under a drop light, grease smeared across her forearms, that Copper started barking. Not his usual low grumble, but a sharp, insistent bark. Harper looked up. He was standing at the bay door, staring into the darkness outside, hackles raised. "Copper, what is it?" She walked over, wiping her hands on a rag, and peered out into the night. The lot was empty. No cars, no people, just the usual scatter of rusted-out frames and the distant hum of the highway. But Copper wasn't barking at nothing. He never did. Harper stepped outside, flashlight in hand. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the lot. Nothing. She was about to turn back when she saw it. A figure standing near the edge of the property, just beyond the reach of the light. Tall, broad-shouldered, hands shoved into the pockets of a jacket. "Can I help you?" Harper called out, her voice steady despite the sudden spike of adrenaline. The figure didn't move for a moment. Then slowly, it stepped forward into the light. A man, maybe in his early 50s, with graying hair and tired eyes. He looked at Harper, then past her, into the garage. His gaze landed on the Corvette, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Grief. Something Harper couldn't name. "That's my father's car," the man said quietly. Harper's grip tightened on the flashlight. "Your father?" The man nodded. "Vincent Callahan. He died 2 months ago. My mother sold everything at the estate sale." He paused, his eyes still fixed on the Corvette. "I didn't know she was selling the car. I would have stopped her if I'd known." Harper didn't say anything. She just waited, letting the silence stretch between them. The man finally looked at her. "My name's Daniel Callahan, and I need to tell you something about that car. Something my father never told anyone." Harper felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced back at the Corvette, sitting under the harsh lights of the garage, stripped down and vulnerable. Then she looked at Daniel. "What kind of something?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "The kind that's been buried for 50 years. The kind that my father took to his grave because he thought it was safer that way." He hesitated, then added, "But you bought the car, which means you're going to find it eventually. And when you do, you're going to have questions." Harper crossed her arms. "Then maybe you should start talking." Daniel took a breath, looked up at the sky like he was asking for permission, then met her eyes again. "That car," he said slowly, "was supposed to take my father to California in 1970. He was going to elope with a woman named Elena. They were going to start a new life together, away from this town, away from everyone who told them it was a mistake." He paused. "But the night before they were supposed to leave, Elena disappeared. No note, no phone call, nothing. Just gone." Harper's heart began to pound. She thought of the photograph, the woman in the sundress, the smile that reached her eyes. What happened to her?
Daniel shook his head. "No one knows. My father searched for years, hired investigators, drove to every town between here and the coast, but he never found her. Eventually, he gave up, married my mother, had me, built a life, but he never got rid of the car. He said it was the last piece of her he had left." Harper stared at him, trying to process what she was hearing. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel's expression hardened. "Because my father hid something in that car, something Elena gave him before she vanished, and if you're going to restore it, you're going to find it. And when you do," he trailed off, then finished quietly, "you need to know the truth, all of it." Harper felt the weight of those words settle over her like a blanket. She looked back at the Corvette, at the photo of Elena still propped on her workbench, and suddenly the car felt different. It wasn't just metal and rubber anymore. It was a vault, a time capsule, a secret. And Harper Cole, whether she wanted to or not, was about to open it. Daniel Callahan didn't leave that night. Instead, he stood in Harper's garage for nearly 2 hours, telling her everything he knew about his father and the woman who vanished. He spoke in a low, measured voice, like he was reading from a script he'd memorized but never wanted to perform. Harper listened, leaning against her workbench with her arms crossed, Copper sitting quietly at her feet. Vincent Callahan had been 28 when he met Elena Morales. She was a waitress at a diner on Route 60, the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee and locals gathered for gossip. Vincent had been driving through on his way back from a job in Phoenix when he stopped for lunch. Elena brought him a menu and a smile. And according to Daniel, that was all it took. His father had been a quiet man, reserved, not the type to fall fast. But Elena was different. She was warm, funny, unafraid of the world in a way that made Vincent want to be braver too. They started seeing each other in secret, not because they were ashamed, but because Ridgeway in 1969 wasn't kind to couples who didn't fit the mold. Elena was Mexican-American, from a family that had lived in Arizona for generations but was still treated like outsiders. Vincent was white, from a family that had money and expectations. His parents made it clear they didn't approve. Her family worried she'd lose herself trying to belong somewhere she never would. So they kept it quiet. They met in the desert, in empty parking lots, in the Corvette that Vincent had saved 2 years to buy. The car became their sanctuary, the one place where none of the outside noise could touch them. And in June of 1970, they made a plan. They'd leave Ridgeway together, drive to California, start over where no one knew their names or their histories. Vincent told his parents he was taking a job in Los Angeles. Elena told her family she was moving in with a cousin in San Diego. Neither was true. They were just going to disappear into the vastness of the West and build something new. But the night before they were supposed to leave, Elena didn't show up. Vincent waited at their meeting spot for hours, engine idling, radio playing softly. She never came. He drove to her apartment, knocked on the door until his knuckles bled. No answer. He went to the diner where she worked. Her manager said she'd called in sick. He checked hospitals, police stations, asked everyone he could find. No one had seen her. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Vincent searched obsessively, convinced something terrible had happened, but there was no evidence of foul play, no sign of struggle, no body. It was like Elena had simply ceased to exist. Eventually, people told him to move on. His parents urged him to forget her. His friends said she'd probably just changed her mind and was too afraid to tell him. But Vincent never believed that. He knew Elena. She wouldn't have run without a word. After 2 years of searching, he finally stopped. He met Daniel's mother, Catherine, at a church social. She was kind, stable, everything Ridgeway expected. They married within a year, had Daniel a year after that, built a comfortable, quiet life. But Vincent never sold the Corvette. He kept it in the garage, covered, untouched, like a grave he visited but never disturbed. He told me once, Daniel said, his voice thick with something Harper couldn't quite name, that every time he looked at that car, he saw her, and he couldn't drive it because it felt like betrayal, like he was moving forward without her, and she was still stuck somewhere in 1970 waiting for him. Harper felt a lump rise in her throat. She looked at the Corvette, stripped down to its bones, and suddenly understood why it felt so heavy. This wasn't just a car, it was a monument to unfinished love. What did he hide? Harper asked quietly. Daniel met her eyes. I don't know exactly, but he told me, a week before he died, that if anyone ever took the car apart, they'd find something Elena gave him, something she wanted him to keep safe. He said it was the only thing he had left that proved she was real. Harper nodded slowly. Then, I'll find it. Daniel hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a small brass key. He held it out to her. This was in my father's nightstand. I don't know what it opens, but I think it's connected. Harper took the key. It was old, tarnished, with a strange symbol etched into the head, a circle with a single line through it. She turned it over in her palm, feeling its weight. Thank you, she said. Daniel nodded, then turned to leave, but at the door he stopped. My father spent 50 years wondering what happened to her.
If you find anything, I need to know. Not just for him. For me. You will, Harper promised. After Daniel left, Harper stood alone in the garage staring at the Corvette. Copper nudged her leg and she reached down to scratch behind his ears. All right, boy, let's find out what Vincent was hiding. She started with the obvious places. The trunk, the wheel wells, the panels beneath the dashboard. Nothing. She checked behind the seats again, under the floor mats, inside the air vents. Still nothing. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Harper's hands were black with grease. Her back ached, and frustration gnawed at the edges of her focus. Then she remembered something her father had taught her years ago. People hide things where they think no one will look, not because the spot is clever, but because it's uncomfortable to reach. Harper crawled under the car with a flashlight and the screwdriver. She started at the rear axle and worked her way forward, inspecting every seam, every bolt, every weld. And then, just behind the driver's side frame rail, she saw it. A metal plate that didn't match the others. It was slightly newer, slightly cleaner, and held in place with screws instead of rivets. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed a socket wrench and carefully removed the screws, one by one. The plate came loose, and behind it was a hollowed-out space just big enough to hold something small. Harper reached inside, her fingers brushing against fabric. She pulled it out slowly. It was a cloth pouch, faded blue, tied shut with a drawstring. Harper sat up, cradling it in her hands like it might shatter. Copper came over and sniffed it cautiously. She loosened the drawstring and opened the pouch. Inside were 3 things. The first was a letter, folded into a tight square. The paper yellowed and brittle. Harper unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, looping, unmistakably feminine. Vincent, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it to our meeting place. I'm so sorry. I wanted to run away with you more than anything in this world, but something happened, something I can't explain in writing. I'm scared, and I don't know who else to trust. There's a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Ridgeway, box 217. The key is with this letter. Inside, you'll find everything. The truth about why I had to disappear, and proof of what I discovered. Please, Vincent, find it. Tell the world what they tried to bury. I loved you. I still do. I always will. Elena. Harper's hands trembled as she read the words again. She reached back into the pouch and pulled out the second item, a brass key identical to the one Daniel had given her. She held them side by side. They were a match. The third item was a photograph, different from the one she'd found in the glove box. This one showed Elena standing in front of a small office building, holding a manila folder, her expression serious, almost defiant. On the back, written in the same elegant script, were 4 words. They can't hide forever. Harper sat on the cold concrete floor of her garage, the letter in one hand, the photograph in the other, and felt the weight of 50 years pressing down on her shoulders. Elena hadn't run away. She'd been running from something, and whatever she'd discovered, whatever truth she'd been trying to protect, it was still locked away in a safety deposit box in a bank that might not even exist anymore. Copper whined softly and rested his head on her knee. Harper looked down at him, then at the Corvette, then at the letter. We're not just restoring a car anymore, are we? She whispered. Copper didn't answer, but somewhere deep in the hollow frame of that 1967 Corvette, Harper could almost hear Elena's voice, 50 years distant, still calling out to be heard. And Harper Cole, mechanic, loner, fixer of broken things, made a decision. She was going to finish what Vincent couldn't. She was going to find the truth. Harper didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of her, reading it over and over until the words blurred together.
Copper lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to check on her, then settling back down with a sigh. The brass key sat beside her coffee mug, catching the dim light from the overhead bulb. By the time dawn broke, Harper had made a list. First National Bank, Box 217. Find out if it still exists. If it doesn't, find out where the records went. If Elena left something behind, Harper was going to find it. Not just for Vincent, not just for Daniel, but for Elena herself. A woman who'd been erased from history deserved to have her voice heard. At 8 a.m., Harper locked up the garage, loaded Copper into her truck, and drove into town. Ridgeway's Main Street looked exactly the way it had for the past 30 years. Tired, sun-bleached, half-empty. The old movie theater was boarded up. The hardware store had a for-lease sign in the window. But tucked between a laundromat and a tax office was a building Harper had passed 1,000 times without really seeing it. First National Bank.
Or what was left of it. The sign was still there, faded and cracked, hanging above a set of glass doors covered in dust. Harper parked across the street and stared at it. The building looked abandoned, but the lights were on inside. She could see movement through the dirty windows. Someone was in there. She climbed out of the truck, told Copper to stay, and crossed the street. The door was unlocked. Inside, the bank felt like a museum. Old wooden desks sat in rows, covered in papers and filing boxes. The teller windows were still intact, their brass bars tarnished and dull. And behind a desk in the corner sat an older man in a cardigan, reading glasses perched on his nose, sorting through stacks of documents. He looked up when Harper walked in. "We're closed," he said flatly. "Doesn't look closed," Harper replied, nodding toward the lights. The man sighed and set down his pen. "We've been closed for 6 years. I'm just here cleaning out the last of the records before the building gets sold. If you need banking services, try the credit union on 4th Street. Harper stepped closer. "I'm not here for banking. I'm here about a safety deposit box. Box 217. The man's expression shifted. Not much, but enough for Harper to notice. He leaned back in his chair and studied her. "Why would you be looking for a box from a bank that's been closed since 2019? Harper pulled the brass key from her pocket and set it on the desk. "Because the person who rented it left this behind, and I think whatever's inside matters." The man picked up the key, turning it over in his hands. He looked at the symbol etched into the head, then back at Harper. "Who are you?" "My name's Harper Cole. I'm a mechanic. I bought a car at an estate sale, and inside it I found a letter from a woman named Elena Morales. She disappeared in 1970. The letter said there was something in box 217 that would explain why." The man was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked over to a filing cabinet, and pulled out a thick ledger. He flipped through the pages, his finger tracing down columns of names and numbers. Finally, he stopped. Box 217. Rented in June 1970 by Elena Morales. Rental fee paid in full for 50 years. Last accessed... He paused, squinting at the faded ink. Never. It was never accessed after the initial deposit. Harper felt her heart pound. "Is the box still here?" The man closed the ledger and looked at her. "The vault's still intact. We couldn't move it when we closed. Too expensive. Everything inside is technically still there, but legally, unclaimed boxes after 50 years become property of the state. If you want access, you'd need a court order or proof of inheritance." Harper leaned forward. "What if I told you the woman who rented that box was murdered? Or disappeared under suspicious circumstances? What if what's inside could finally give her family answers?" The man's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the vault door at the back of the room, then back at Harper. "Who you got proof of that?" Harper pulled out the letter and the photograph. She laid them on the desk. "This is her handwriting. This is her face, and this is the key she left behind for the man she loved. He spent 50 years looking for her. He died 2 months ago without ever knowing what happened.
His son deserves the truth. Elena deserves the truth. The man stared at the letter for what felt like an eternity. Then he took off his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and let out a long breath. I could lose my license for this. Or you could help close a 50-year-old mystery, Harper said quietly. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened. What's your dog's name? Harper blinked, caught off guard. Copper? The man nodded. I had a dog named Copper once, best friend I ever had. He stood up, grabbed a ring of keys from a drawer, and walked toward the vault. Come on. But if anyone asks, you were never here. Harper followed him across the empty bank, her boots echoing on the tile floor. The vault door was massive, circular, like something out of an old heist movie. The man spun the combination lock, and with a deep metallic groan, the door swung open. Inside was a small room lined with metal boxes, each one labeled with a number. He ran his finger along the rows until he found it. Box 217. He inserted Harper's key into one lock, then used a master key for the second. The box slid out with a soft scrape. He set it on a small table in the center of the vault and stepped back. I'll give you 10 minutes. Whatever you find, it's yours. But after that, I'm locking this place up for good. Harper nodded. The man left, pulling the vault door halfway closed behind him. She was alone. She opened the box. Inside was a stack of documents, neatly organized and preserved in plastic sleeves. Harper pulled them out one by one, her hands shaking. The first was a land deed, a parcel of property on the outskirts of Ridgeway, dated 1968. The owner listed was a company called Westford Industrial Holdings. Harper had never heard of it. The second document was a contract. It outlined the sale of the land to the state of Arizona for the construction of a new highway, but there were notes in the margins, handwritten in Elena's script. Contaminated. Buried waste. No environmental review. Harper's stomach dropped. She kept reading.
The third document was a photograph, aerial, black and white, showing the land in question. There were large metal drums stacked in rows, partially buried. Another note, toxic chemicals, mercury, lead, industrial solvents, dumped illegally, covered up before sale. The fourth document was a letter, typed on official letterhead from Westford Industrial Holdings. It was addressed to a state official, offering a bribe, $50,000 in cash, to approve the land sale without an environmental inspection. At the bottom, a handwritten signature, and beneath it, Elena had written in red ink, proof. Harper sat back, her mind racing. Elena had uncovered a conspiracy. A company had illegally dumped toxic waste, then sold the contaminated land to the state for a highway project. If the truth had come out, it would have been a scandal, lawsuits, prison time, millions in cleanup costs. So they silenced it. And Elena, who'd stumbled onto the proof, became a liability. The final item in the box was a small notebook, the kind reporters used. Inside were names, dates, meetings. Elena had been documenting everything. She'd been building a case, and on the last page, in her elegant handwriting, was a single sentence. If something happens to me, it's because they found out. Harper closed the notebook, her chest tight. Elena hadn't run away. She'd been silenced, and for 50 years, the people responsible had gotten away with it. She gathered the documents, carefully sliding them back into the plastic sleeves. The man appeared in the doorway. Time's up. Harper looked at him. Do you know what this is? He shook his head. And I don't want to. Whatever it is, it's yours now. Do what you think is right. Harper walked out of the vault, the box tucked under her arm. She left the bank, climbed into her truck, and sat there for a long time, staring at the documents on the passenger seat.
Copper nuzzled her hand, sensing her distress. She was going to blow the whistle, Harper whispered, and they killed her for it. She thought about Vincent, waiting in that Corvette, engine idling, radio playing, waiting for a woman who would never come. She thought about Daniel, growing up with a father who never stopped grieving. She thought about Elena, 20 years old, standing in front of that office building with a manila folder, believing the truth mattered. Harper started the engine. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing for certain. Elena's story wasn't over, not by a long shot. Harper didn't go back to the garage, not yet. Instead, she drove to the public library on the edge of town, a squat brick building that smelled like old paper and air conditioning that hadn't been serviced in a decade. Copper waited in the truck, windows cracked, while Harper carried the documents inside in a canvas bag. The librarian, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a chain, looked up from her desk. Harper had been here before. She'd spent countless hours as a teenager hiding in the stacks, reading auto repair manuals her father couldn't afford to buy. The librarian recognized her. "Harper Cole," she said with a faint smile. "Haven't seen you in a while. What brings you in?" "Research," Harper said. "I need to look up old newspaper archives, specifically 1970, June through August." The librarian gestured toward a row of ancient computers in the corner. "Microfiche machine is still working. Most of the local papers from the 60s and 70s are digitized, but some you'll have to scroll through the old-fashioned way. Let me know if you need help." Harper settled into a chair, booted up the machine, and started searching. She began with the Ridgeway Gazette, the town's weekly paper that had folded in the early 90s. She scrolled through edition after edition, scanning headlines, looking for anything related to Elena Morales, Westford Industrial Holdings, or the Highway Project. For the first hour, she found nothing. Local news, high school sports, advertisements for tractors and refrigerators. Then, in the July 12, 1970 edition, buried on page 6, she found it. The article was short. Barely 3 paragraphs. It stated that Elena Morales, 20, a waitress at the Route 60 diner, had been reported missing by her family after failing to return home on June 29th. Police were investigating but had no leads. The article ended with a request for anyone with information to contact the Ridgeway Sheriff's Department. Harper's jaw tightened. That was it. 3 paragraphs. No follow-up articles. No updates. Elena had vanished, and the world had moved on like she'd never existed. She kept searching. 2 weeks later, she found another small article, this time on page 9. The article stated that after an investigation, authorities had concluded Elena Morales had likely left town of her own accord. Friends reported she had talked about moving to California. No evidence of foul play was found. The case was closed. Harper stared at the screen, fury building in her chest. They hadn't even tried, or worse, they'd been paid not to. She switched gears and started searching for Westford Industrial Holdings. It took longer, but eventually she found a mention in the business section of the Phoenix Herald dated May 1970. The article praised the deal as a major step forward in Arizona's infrastructure development. It mentioned that the land had been purchased for $1.2 million and would be used to extend Route 60 through Ridgeway. No mention of environmental concerns, no mention of inspections, just a clean, simple transaction. Harper pulled out Elena's documents and cross-referenced the dates. The land sale had been finalized on June 15, 1970. Elena had discovered the contamination and compiled her evidence sometime in early June. She'd written her letter to Vincent on June 28th. She disappeared on June 29th. The timing wasn't a coincidence.
Harper printed everything she could, stuffed the papers into her bag, and left the library. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly.
She climbed into the truck, and Copper immediately licked her face, sensing her agitation. "I know, buddy," she muttered, scratching behind his ears. "This is bigger than we thought." She pulled out her phone and called Daniel Callahan. He answered on the second ring. "Harper?" "I found it," she said. "I found what Elena left in the safety deposit box. And Daniel, it's bad." There was a long pause. "How bad?" "Conspiracy, cover-up, possible murder bad. I need to show you. Can you meet me?" "Where?" "My garage. 1 hour." Daniel arrived exactly on time, pulling up in a dusty sedan. Harper was waiting outside, the documents spread across her workbench. Copper sat nearby, tail wagging when Daniel approached. "Show me," Daniel said, his voice tense. Harper walked him through everything: the land deed, the contract, the photographs, the bribe letter, Elena's notes. She explained the timeline, the newspaper articles, the way the case had been buried. By the time she finished, Daniel's face had gone pale. "They killed her," he whispered. "I think so," Harper said quietly. "Or they made her disappear. Either way, she was a threat, and they eliminated her." Daniel sank onto a stool, running his hands through his hair. "My father knew. He had to have known. That's why he kept the car. That's why he never moved on. He knew she didn't run away." He probably suspected, but without proof, who would believe him? A grieving man claiming his missing girlfriend uncovered a conspiracy? They would have called him crazy. Daniel looked up at her, eyes red. "What do we do now?" Harper leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "We finish what Elena started. We expose them." "Expose who? Westford Industrial Holdings? That company probably doesn't even exist anymore. The people involved are either dead or long gone." "Maybe, but the contamination is still there. That land is still toxic. And if the state built a highway over it without cleanup, that's a public health crisis. People have been driving over poisoned ground for 50 years, drinking water from wells nearby, living in houses built on contaminated soil. This isn't just about justice for Elena. It's about protecting people now." Daniel stared at her, something like hope flickering in his eyes. "You really think we can do this?" "I don't know, but I'm sure as hell going to try." Over the next 3 days, Harper and Daniel worked together, piecing the story together like an engine rebuilding. Harper reached out to a local investigative journalist named Marcus Riley, a man in his 60s who'd been covering Arizona politics for decades. She'd read his work before, deep dives into corruption, environmental scandals, stories no one else wanted to touch. She met him at a coffee shop in Phoenix, Copper waiting in the truck outside. Marcus listened as Harper laid out everything: Elena's disappearance, the documents, the timeline, the cover-up. He didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. He just listened, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "You know what you're doing, right? You're accusing the state government of covering up an illegal toxic waste dump. You're saying they let a woman disappear to protect that secret. That's not a story. That's a bomb." "Good," Harper said. "Then help me light the fuse." Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll need copies of everything, and I'll need to verify it independently. If this is real, if it holds up, I'll run it. But Harper, once this goes public, there's no taking it back. You're going to make enemies, powerful ones." Harper met his gaze. "Elena made enemies 50 years ago, and it got her killed. I'm not backing down." Marcus smiled faintly. "All right then, let's burn it all down." 2 weeks later, Marcus called. "I verified the land records, cross-checked the contracts, tracked down a retired EPA inspector who confirmed there was never an environmental review. Harper, this story is real, and it's worse than you thought. That highway runs through 3 counties now. Thousands of people live within a mile of that original contamination site. If the waste is still there, it could be leaching into the groundwater." Harper's stomach turned. "When can you publish?" "Sunday front page. I'm calling it The Woman Who Knew Too Much: How Arizona Buried a Toxic Secret and the Whistleblower Who Vanished." Harper closed her eyes. Use her name. Elena Morales. Make sure everyone knows her name. I will, Marcus promised. That night, Harper sat in the garage with Copper, staring at the Corvette. It was still stripped down, still waiting to be rebuilt, but it didn't feel like just a car anymore. It felt like a testament, a memorial, a promise kept. She thought about Vincent, working in this very garage, running his hands over this same metal, carrying a grief he could never name. She thought about Elena, standing in front of that office building with proof in her hands, believing the truth mattered more than her own safety. And she thought about herself, a small-town mechanic who'd stumbled into a 50-year-old secret and decided it was worth fighting for. Sunday morning, the story broke, and nothing in Ridgway, Arizona would ever be the same again. The article hit the internet at 6 in the morning. By 9, Harper's phone wouldn't stop ringing. She'd turned it off after the 5th unknown number, but that didn't stop people from showing up at her garage. News vans, reporters with cameras, people from town she hadn't spoken to in years, all of them wanting a piece of the story. Copper barked at every new arrival until Harper finally locked the bay doors and retreated to the back office. Daniel called just after 10. Have you seen it?
I haven't looked, Harper admitted. Is it bad? It's everywhere. CNN picked it up. So did the Washington Post. Marcus didn't just write a story, Harper. He wrote a reckoning. Harper opened her laptop and pulled up the article. The headline stretched across the top of the screen in bold letters. The woman who knew too much, how Arizona buried a toxic secret, and the whistleblower who vanished trying to expose it. Below it was a photograph Marcus had obtained from Elena's family. Elena, standing outside the Route 60 diner in her uniform, smiling at the camera. She looked so young, so alive. Harper read through the article slowly. Marcus had done exactly what he promised. He'd laid out every detail. The illegal dumping, the falsified land sale, the bribe to state officials, Elena's investigation, her disappearance. He'd interviewed former employees of Westford Industrial Holdings who admitted anonymously that the company had disposed of materials improperly. He'd tracked down the retired state official who'd signed off on the land purchase. The man refused to comment, but his silence spoke volumes. And then there was the environmental angle. Marcus had hired an independent soil testing company to take samples from the area where the highway now ran. The results were damning. Mercury levels 40 times above safe limits, lead contamination in the groundwater, traces of industrial solvents that had been banned since the 1980s. The article ended with a photograph of the Corvette, sitting in Harper's garage, stripped and skeletal. The caption read, "The 1967 Corvette that held Elena Morales' evidence for 50 years, now being restored by the woman who refused to let her story die." Harper closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair. Her hands were shaking. "This is really happening," she whispered. By that afternoon, the state issued a statement. It was carefully worded, full of bureaucratic language designed to say nothing while sounding official. They acknowledged concerns raised by recent reporting and promised a thorough review of historical land transactions. They made no mention of Elena, no apology, no accountability. But the public wasn't buying it. Social media exploded. People started sharing the article, demanding answers, calling for investigations. Environmental groups organized protests outside the state capitol. Families living near the highway began testing their well water and finding contamination. Lawyers started filing lawsuits. And through it all, one name kept appearing over and over again: Elena Morales. Harper watched it unfold from her garage, equal parts awed and terrified. She thought exposing the truth would bring closure. Instead, it had ripped open a wound 50 years old and still bleeding. 3 days after the article published, Harper received a visitor she wasn't expecting.
A black SUV pulled up outside the garage, windows tinted, engine silent. Two men in suits stepped out. They didn't look like reporters. They looked like lawyers, or worse. Harper met them at the door, Copper growling low beside her. "Miss Cole," the taller one said, "I represent the law firm handling the estate of Westford Industrial Holdings." Harper crossed her arms. "The company that dumped toxic waste and got a woman killed? The company that ceased operations in 1985 and has been defunct for nearly 40 years. We're here because your recent activities have raised certain legal concerns." "Legal concerns?" Harper repeated flatly. The second man spoke. "You removed documents from a safety deposit box that wasn't legally yours to access. Those documents are now being used in a national news story. We could make a case for theft, Miss Cole, or at the very least, mishandling of private property." Harper felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady. "Those documents belong to Elena Morales. She's been missing for 50 years. I'd say someone needed to handle them." Garrison pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. "We're not here to threaten you. We're here to offer you a settlement, a substantial one. Enough to restore that Corvette 10 times over, enough to open a real shop, hire a staff, build the business you've always wanted. All you have to do is sign an NDA, return the original documents, and stop talking to the press." Harper stared at the card, but didn't take it. "You want me to be quiet?" "We want to resolve this matter without further escalation," Garrison said smoothly. "The company is gone. The people involved are dead. Dragging this through the courts won't bring Miss Morales back, but it will destroy lives. Employees who had nothing to do with the dumping, families of the executives who've moved on. Is that really what you want?" Harper looked at him for a long moment, then she smiled, cold and sharp. "You know what I want? I want Elena Morales to get the justice she died trying to find. I want every person who drank contaminated water to know why their kids are sick. I want the truth, and you can't buy that." She stepped back and slammed the door in their faces. Copper barked once, sharp and approving. Harper leaned against the door, heart pounding, hand shaking. She heard the SUV start up and drive away. Only then did she let herself breathe. That night, Marcus called. "I heard Garrison's firm paid you a visit. How did you—" "They tried the same thing with me, offered me $250,000 to retract the story. I told them to shove it." Harper sat down heavily on a stool. "They're scared." "Good. They should be. Harper, the EPA just announced they're opening a formal investigation into the contamination. State prosecutors are reviewing the old land sale documents. This thing is going federal. You did that. You and Elena." Harper looked at the photograph of Elena she'd pinned to the wall. The one from the glove box. Elena standing beside the Corvette, smiling at the camera. "I just opened a box."
"You did a hell of a lot more than that," Marcus said. "Listen, there's going to be more pressure, more lawyers, more threats, maybe worse. You need to be careful." "I know. Do you? Because the people who covered this up 50 years ago didn't just disappear. They had kids, grandkids, people who inherited their money, their power, their secrets. And those people don't want this coming out." Harper swallowed hard. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying watch your back. Keep that dog close. And if anything feels wrong, call me." After they hung up, Harper sat alone in the garage, Copper curled at her feet. The Corvette loomed in the shadows, still broken, still waiting. She thought about Vincent, keeping this car hidden for decades because it was all he had left of Elena. She thought about Daniel, finally learning the truth about what his father had carried all those years. And she thought about Elena, 20 years old, armed with nothing but evidence and courage,
believing she could take on a system designed to crush people like her. Harper stood up and walked over to the Corvette. She placed her hand on the cold metal of the hood. "I'm not stopping," she whispered. "I don't care what they offer. I don't care what they threaten. Your story is out there now, and I'm going to make sure it stays there." The next morning, Harper opened the garage doors for the first time in days. Sunlight flooded in, warm and bright. She rolled up her sleeves, grabbed her tools, and got to work. She was going to finish restoring this car. Not because it was valuable, not because it was famous now, but because it deserved to run again, because Vincent had loved it, because Elena had trusted it with her truth, and because some things, once broken, are worth the fight to make whole again. As she worked, Copper lay in his usual spot on the bench, watching her with those wise, steady eyes. The phone rang a few more times. Harper ignored it. Reporters knocked on the door. She didn't answer. She had work to do. And for the first time in a long time, Harper Cole knew exactly what she was fighting for. 6 months had passed since the story broke. Winter had come to Ridgeway, bringing cold desert nights and a different kind of clarity. The media frenzy had died down, replaced by the slow grinding machinery of federal investigations and legal proceedings. The EPA had confirmed the contamination. Criminal charges were being prepared against surviving executives who'd been involved in the cover-up. Families affected by the toxic waste were receiving settlements, though no amount of money could undo the damage. And through it all, Harper had kept her head down and her hands busy. The Corvette was almost finished. She'd rebuilt the engine from the ground up. New pistons, new gaskets, every component cleaned or replaced until the 427 big block gleamed like it had just rolled off the assembly line. She'd restored the interior, sourcing original seat covers and period-correct carpet. The dashboard had been repaired and refinished. The chrome had been replated. Even the tires were authentic reproductions from 1967. The body had taken the longest. Harper had spent weeks stripping the old paint, repairing rust, smoothing out dents that had sat untouched for decades. She'd chosen to repaint it in the original Nassau blue, the same color Vincent had ordered it in. Every coat of paint, every stroke of the buffer felt like an act of reverence. Daniel visited regularly, watching the transformation with quiet amazement. Sometimes he'd just sit on the workbench beside Copper, not saying anything, just being present. Other times he'd help, holding a panel steady while Harper welded, handing her tools, learning the language of restoration the way his father never got the chance to teach him. One afternoon in late February, as Harper was installing the final piece of trim, Daniel spoke. "My mother wants to meet you." Harper looked up, surprised. "Catherine?" Daniel nodded. "She knows everything now, about Elena, about what my father carried all those years. She's not angry. I think she's relieved, like she finally understands why he could never fully let go." Harper wiped her hands on a rag. "Does she blame me for bringing it all back up?" "No," Daniel said softly. "She said you gave my father something he never had, closure, even if he didn't live to see it." 2 weeks later, Harper drove out to the house where Vincent had spent his final years. Catherine Callahan answered the door, a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes that had seen more than their share of sorrow. She invited Harper in, offered her tea, and they sat together in a living room filled with photographs. Vincent was in many of them, young and strong, then older and quieter, always with that same distant look in his eyes. Catherine saw Harper staring at one particular photo, Vincent standing beside the Corvette in 1967, hand resting on the hood, smiling. He was never the same after she disappeared. Catherine said quietly, "I knew it when I married him. I knew there was a part of him I'd never reach, but I loved him anyway. And I think in his way, he loved me too." Harper set down her teacup. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry this had to come out the way it did." Catherine shook her head. "Don't be. Elena deserved to be remembered, and Vincent deserved to know he wasn't crazy for believing she didn't just run away. You gave them both that." She reached over and took Harper's hand. "Thank you."
When Harper left that day, she carried with her something she hadn't expected: forgiveness. Not just from Catherine, but from herself. She'd spent so long believing she was only good at fixing broken things because she was broken herself. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe being broken just meant she understood what it took to heal. By early March, the Corvette was ready for its first test drive. Harper had been putting it off, afraid of what it might mean, afraid the car wouldn't run, or worse, afraid it would, and the story would truly be over. But on a clear Saturday morning, with Daniel and Copper both present, she decided it was time. She slid into the driver's seat, the restored leather smooth and firm beneath her. The steering wheel felt perfect in her hands. She turned the key, and the engine roared to life, a deep, throaty growl that echoed through the garage like thunder. Harper's heart leapt. She pressed the accelerator gently, and the engine responded, smooth and powerful, every cylinder firing in perfect harmony. Daniel was grinning. Copper barked excitedly. Harper felt tears prick her eyes. "She's alive," she whispered. She took the car out onto the open road, Daniel following in his sedan. The Corvette drove like a dream, responsive, powerful, exactly the way it was meant to be. Harper pushed it up to 60, feeling the wind whip through the open windows, feeling the ghost of Vincent beside her, the memory of Elena in every mile. When she finally pulled back into the garage an hour later, she was exhausted and exhilarated. Daniel walked over, still smiling. "My father would have loved this," he said. "I know," Harper replied. A week later, Marcus Riley called with news. "There's going to be a memorial for Elena. The town's organizing it. Her family, community leaders, some of the people affected by the contamination. They want to honor her, recognize what she tried to do." "When?" Harper asked. "Next month, April 15th. And Harper, they want you to speak." Harper's stomach dropped. "I don't do speeches." "You don't have to give a speech. Just tell people what you found, why it mattered. They need to hear it from you." Harper agreed, though the idea terrified her. The memorial was held in Ridgeway's town square, a dusty patch of grass with a small gazebo and a flagpole. Hundreds of people showed up. Elena's surviving relatives, now elderly, holding photographs of the young woman they'd lost. Families who'd been affected by the contamination, some holding signs demanding justice. Reporters, activists, and people who'd simply been moved by the story. A statue had been commissioned, a bronze sculpture of a young woman holding a folder, standing tall, unafraid. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Elena Morales, 1950 to 1970. She sought the truth when others chose silence. She will not be forgotten." When it was Harper's turn to speak, she walked to the microphone with Copper at her side. She looked out at the crowd, at Daniel standing in the front row, at Catherine beside him, at all the faces waiting for her to say something profound. She didn't have a prepared speech. She just spoke from the heart. "I'm not good with words. I'm better with engines. But I'm here because of a car. A 1967 Corvette that I bought for $800, thinking I was just getting a project. Instead, I found a story. Elena's story. She paused, gathering herself. Elena Morales was 20 years old when she disappeared. She worked at a diner. She fell in love. She discovered something terrible, and instead of looking away, she documented it. She gathered proof. She was going to expose people who thought they were untouchable. And for that, she paid the ultimate price. For 50 years, she was forgotten, erased. But the truth doesn't disappear just because people bury it. It waits. And sometimes, if you're lucky, someone stumbles across it and refuses to let it stay hidden. She looked at the statue, at Elena's bronze face frozen in determination. I didn't know Elena, but I know what she stood for. She stood for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. She believed that doing the right thing mattered more than staying safe. And because of that, because of her courage, families today are getting answers. Justice is finally being served. Lives are being saved. Harper's voice grew stronger.
So, when you look at this statue, don't just see a victim. See a hero. See someone who refused to be silenced. And remember that every single one of us has that same choice, to look away or to speak up. Elena chose to speak, and her voice is still echoing 50 years later. The crowd erupted in applause. Harper stepped back from the microphone, overwhelmed. Daniel hugged her. Catherine squeezed her hand. Copper wagged his tail, sensing the emotion in the air. After the ceremony, Harper stood alone by the statue for a moment, running her fingers over the bronze plaque. She thought about the journey, from a rusted car in an estate sale, to this moment, standing in front of hundreds of people, honoring a woman who'd been forgotten. "We did it," Harper whispered. "Your story's out there now. No one can take it away." That evening, Harper returned to her garage. The Corvette sat gleaming under the lights, fully restored, perfect. But Harper knew she couldn't keep it. It didn't belong to her. She called Daniel. "I want to donate the car, to a museum or Elena's family, or wherever it'll do the most good. It's not mine to keep." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There's a museum in Phoenix. They're creating an exhibit about Elena, about the contamination, about the fight for environmental justice. They asked if the Corvette could be part of it." "Perfect," Harper said. 2 weeks later, the Corvette was transported to the museum. Harper stood in the exhibit hall, watching as it was positioned under soft lighting, surrounded by photographs of Elena, copies of the documents she had hidden, and information about the ongoing legal cases. A placard beside the car read, "The car that carried a secret for 50 years, and the mechanic who refused to let it die." Harper stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of everything finally lift. She'd started this journey alone, with nothing but a toolbox and a broken-down car. She was ending it, surrounded by people who cared, having honored a woman who deserved to be remembered, having proven that one person, no matter how small or overlooked, could change everything. As Harper walked out of the museum that day, Copper trotting beside her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because the work was done. There would always be more broken things to fix, more stories to uncover, more fights worth fighting. But because she learned something Elena had known all along. That courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let the truth stay buried. Harper climbed into her truck, Copper hopping in beside her. She started the engine and headed home, back to her garage, back to the work she loved. Because there would always be another engine to rebuild,
another story waiting to be told. And Harper Cole, mechanic, truth seeker, and defender of forgotten voices, was ready for whatever came next. Sometimes the most extraordinary stories are hidden in the most ordinary places. A rusted car, a dusty letter, a key that unlocks 50 years of silence. Elena Morales was forgotten, but she was never truly gone. And because one woman refused to walk away, her voice echoes on, reminding us all that the truth is always worth fighting for. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Remember that every person has a story worth telling, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to listen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.